Oh, hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, and I'm really, really excited to have Allison Carmen here, who's going to be talking about A Year Without Men. It's a 12-step program to empower women and men. Great title, great book, and I'm going to just give you a brief bio of her because I'm really anxious to talk to Allison. Allison Carmen holds a BA in accounting, a JD of law, and a master's of law in taxation. This is what's really interesting. She worked for a large firm in Manhattan, and then she founded her own law firm and built a successful real estate practice, corporate mergers and acquisitions. But after 15 years of practicing law, Allison decided she wanted to change. And she began doing business consulting, business coaching, which morphed into life coaching. Today, she's got a huge practice with clients ranging from owners of multi-million-dollar companies to artists, actors, writers, and parents. And her books are incredibly down to earth and incredibly helpful as well. Allison is the author of The Gift of Maybe. Her book focuses green. Oh, we lost images for a second, but they came back. Good. She's a popular radio guest, and she's been featured on NPR, CBS, and many other shows. Recently, she launched her podcast, 10 Minutes to Less Suffering, and I already watched a few of them, and they're great. They're so empowering. But the book we're going to start talking about today is Allison's A Year Without Men, a 12-point guide to empower and inspire women. Thank you so much for being here, Allison. I'm just thrilled.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I also want to read the blurb that I gave Allison's book. With a fabulous premise, Allison Carmen shows us that we need not be a woman in a man's world, not when we can create our own world instead. I love this warm, inspiring book. So you have a wonderful backstory about how this book came to be. It's sort of like joy coming out of horror, a horrible year. Can you tell us about that, please?
Well, it's so interesting. You know, I've had a very long career, as you just described. I was a lawyer. I became a business consultant. I went into the self-help field. I had what I thought was a lovely marriage. I had two wonderful girls, and I did have a lot of angst and problems in my life. But if you would have asked me on June 29th, 2018, I would have said, life's good. And then on June 30th, 2018, my husband came home from the gym, and he flat out said, I want to leave you. I want to go date other women. And he started to describe the type of women that he wanted to be with. And my whole life just fell apart. And I remember I just fell to the ground, and it was as if I didn't know how I was going to exist with the most important structure in my life. This was my family. This was everything to me. And then within a 2-week period, my biggest male client stopped speaking to me. He was selling his business. And all the other male clients kind of, things had worked out that they had moved on and projects had ended. And then a couple of days later, this all-women day hospital called the Motherhood Center, the CEO called me up. She was a client of mine, and she asked me to become their part-time CFO. And literally within a 2-week period, all the biggest men in my life were gone, and I was surrounded by only women. The Motherhood Center was only all women employees. I was surrounded by my daughters and just women everywhere. And it became this experience where that structure was gone in my life. And it was a real awakening. It was crushing. It was painful. It was devastating. But at the same time, I started to see all the places in my life that I was hiding, that I was compromising, that I wasn't really myself because I was trying to fit into this structure, this patriarchy that was really never made for me, made for most women. And so in a way, it became an awakening. A painful awakening, and that's what the book is about. It's about all the places that we need to shift within ourselves as women so we could go back into the world and be our true selves and start businesses and maybe be different at work and be more who we are and just kind of find that authentic nature of our truth so we could really make the world a better place. That's how I see it at this point, 3 years later.
I have many more questions, but we actually have a question for you. And anybody out there, any questions that you'd like to ask Allison, just pop it in the chat and we'll get to it. Gail Rosenfeld has asked, when do you sleep? You're a busy person.
When do I sleep? Um, that's a funny question. I sleep sometimes.
Are you the kind of person where you're happiest when you're doing a million things, or are you able to relax?
Yeah, I need my space. I find that we're most powerful when we're able to be present. And so if I get too busy, I kind of get away from myself and I become very future oriented. And when we're not in the present and we're in the future, that's when the worry and the anxiety and everything starts to kick in. So I have a lot of daily practices that I need to be aware of all the time so I can stay centered and present, because I believe we create the future in the present. And
Yes.
when that's where our most creative, best, most powerful selves. So yes, I need to have a lot of time, quiet time. And then when I'm up and I'm moving, I could still stay present, but without the quiet time, it doesn't happen for me.
That whole idea of this book, and also in your previous book, which I also love, The Power of Maybe, you talk a lot about being in that present moment, which is really difficult for most people to do. We either think about the past, or we fast forward into the future, or we catastrophize. You have a lot of exercises in your book and a lot of suggestions, but what's your personal way of staying in the moment when something horrifying or unnerving happens to you?
Well, for me, I always say that I was addicted to certainty for most of my life. That if I didn't know what was going to happen next, I projected things were going to be bad or they weren't going to work out. So I get it. I get that fear of the future, that fear of the unknown, because deep down we're afraid we're not okay. And that's what we're always struggling with. Am I okay? Will this be okay? What's going to happen next? We want our children to be okay. We want to be able to pay our mortgage. We want life to be the way we need it to be so we can feel safe and secure. And that comes down to our relationship with uncertainty. And I truly believe that our relationship with uncertainty dictates the quality of our lives. It dictates who you're going to marry, the job you're going to take, your level of presence, your level of happiness. And so for me, when I was addicted to certainty, I was stressed, I was worried, and everything was a catastrophe. And then one day, I heard this beautiful Taoist story about this farmer, and he had a horse, and his horse ran away. And his neighbor came by and said, "You have the worst luck." And the farmer said, "Maybe." But the next day, the horse came back with 5 mares. And the neighbor came by to the farmer and said, "You have the best luck." And the farmer said, "Maybe."
Maybe.
And the next day, the farmer's son is on the horse. He falls off and breaks his leg. And the neighbor comes by to the farmer and says, "You have the worst luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the army comes to take his son to war, but they can't take him because his leg is broken. And the neighbor comes by to the farmer and says, "You have the best luck." And the farmer said, "Maybe." And that story changed my life, because when I was addicted to certainty, the minute something bad happened, I couldn't imagine it getting better. I couldn't imagine something good happening. So although it's a Taoist story, which means things are neither good or bad, but for me, it reminded me there's hope in the unknown. We forget that if you want your life to change, it has to happen in the unknown. And this little word, maybe, changed everything. Because I would say, well, maybe my thought's not true. And maybe something else will happen. Maybe this is good. Maybe it'll get better. And so this maybe practice, which I give an exercise in both my books, actually, that people can write their biggest fear down. What's your biggest fear? I'm afraid I'm not okay. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. I'm afraid I'm sick. And then you question that fear. Are you absolutely certain that fear is true? And the beauty of life is nothing is certain. So your fear is
right. That's right.
And then do the maybe practice. Maybe I'm not going to lose my job. Maybe I'll call someone else and something else will happen. Maybe I'm not sick. Maybe if I'm sick, I'll get better. And you do maybe statement after maybe statement. And this little idea of maybe has changed my life, because it allows me to stay on uncertainty with hope. And it's really a game changer. A relationship with uncertainty, I think, is the key to a happy life, a present life, and a successful life, because you're going to take more risks if you're not always worried that the end is near.
That's wonderful. I also wanted to talk about, you talk a lot about professional life in this book too, and about leading with compassion and with empathy. And I found this is great, because I only had one job many, many years ago. And of course it was run by men, powerful white men, and their attitudes towards their staff was always, well, we're going to ride herd on them, and we're going to, it was to make you small, so you knew that you were small. And when women began to rise up in that company, they were encouraged to act like their male bosses. You have a very different model of that. And you're actually turning that male model on its head. Tell us a little bit about how women can start acting differently in their workplace to overturn that model.
Yeah. Well, it's very hard because you go into a structure like if you're told where women are told like we're equal. We're equal. We go to college, we get degrees, we're able to go out into the workforce. But if you look at statistics, right, you see that women and men were graduating at equal numbers in 1991, and today only 5% of the S&P corporations have women CEOs, and only I think 20% of the women are on the board. So we're not being successful really acting like someone else. And I believe the only way to true creativity and true success is through true authenticity. But we're in these cultures where we're told no emotions, you can't act like yourself, don't act like that. But it was so interesting. The first time it occurred to me was at the Motherhood Center. There are no men. And I was at a director's meeting, and this woman at the meeting started hysterically crying. And she was talking through crying, and she was saying some really great things. Nobody budged and nobody cared. And it was a wonderful meeting. And in corporate America, they make you believe like tears sink ships. And that's not true. There's nothing wrong with emotions. The problem with emotions is when you behave badly and you put it on your coworker. And so I think that if we have a culture where you're allowed to say you're stressed, you're allowed to say you're worried, you're allowed to be exactly who you are, you're going to have a staff that's more creative, more compassionate, more empathetic, more productive, and eventually more profitable because people are going to want to stay. And I think this old paradigm of, you have to act like a robot, you have to act cold, you have to not be yourself, it's outdated. And I think it's just a formula to disempower women in the workplace. And I think the more women are able to come forward as their true selves, I think this thing will shift and the social contracts in corporations will really start to change.
Can you give me an example? That's so fascinating. I'd love it if you could give me an example of what would be authentic, appropriate behavior and what wouldn't. Like, let's take the crying woman. Would it be inappropriate if the crying woman grabbed a coworker and said, "You have to come in the ladies' room with me and talk to me," as opposed to her, would the right thing to do for that woman go to her coworkers and say, "I'm really, really sorry, I've had a terrible day," and maybe wipe away a tear, but continue working?
Yeah. I think that they both could be appropriate. Like, I'm not advocating everybody let's cry at work and tell our coworkers, but we have moments. We have moments in life that, that this realness comes up, these feelings, these emotions. So it could be appropriate if you have a close relationship with someone at work and you want to take them into the bathroom, you can do that. I'm also a big believer that, reactions are dangerous, like that kind of knee-jerk reaction. We need to be more responsive. We need to be more thoughtful, but sometimes things come up. As long as you're respectful to your coworkers and you're kind and you're not putting bad behaviors on anybody else, I don't have any problem with you turning to your coworker and saying, "I'm feeling really stressed right now. This is really not working for me. I'm really struggling. Do you mind if we talk about it?" To me, it's more real. And I think the pandemic kind of brought that out a lot for people because a lot of us were on Zoom, and you're on Zoom and then three, 2-year-olds walk in and they're screaming and they're yelling, or you hear someone's fire alarm go off. And I think that we saw that humanity can exist in corporate America. I think we're better when we form better relationships, more in truth and kindness. And yes, you have to act professional, but you don't have to act like a robot. And I think that, like I said, I think it's a very outdated model. Work-life balance is important. People's emotional well-beings are important. And I think respect for each gender is important too, and a collaborative way to work together. So I see a new future, but unfortunately, corporate America is still made for men. And I think that as women, we need to kind of shift our perspective and go out into the world and try to change it. And I'm not putting it on women like it shouldn't be our responsibility, but at this point, I hope that women start their own businesses and change within themselves so they can go out in a more powerful way and put their best foot forward, their true self forward.
I totally agree. I think Zoom, just the dint of Zoom where you can see behind people and see how they're living or where they're living. I mean, who hasn't seen that video of the lawyer who somehow put a cat face on his face and loved that guy sort of for doing it, because it was a very human thing. So I want to ask, do you think, I mean, I think so, but I want to know what you think. Do you think that men can also benefit from reading this book and change in their professional life? Or do you think the division with the sexes is too great?
No, I actually think the only way to move forward is to move forward in a collaborative way. The book is female focused, but it's also explaining the female experience. It's explaining my experience in the business world. And I think that first of all, it's a self-improvement, as much as it's a feminist book, it's also a self-improvement book. So if you forget that kind of slant towards feminism, anybody could be helped by the points in the book, because it's about uncertainty, it's about acceptance, it's about value, it's about expectations. So it'll help anybody. But also, I think to understand the experience that your coworker is going through, your wife is going through, your daughter is going through, it kind of elevates you. I mean, and because everybody wants a better world, I think deep down, it's just nobody knows how to get there. Everybody wants more work-life balance. And to tell you the truth, even men, there are only a few men who make it to the top. A man who has a stressful situation, someone gets sick in his life, if women are not treated well, when he has a bad moment, he's not going to be treated well either, unless the workplace shifts. So I think that this book, it is for anyone. I think that women might be helped by it more, but I think for a man to understand the female experience will give them the opportunity to show up for work differently. And I think it improves it'll improve life for everybody. That's at the end of the day, we have to work together, and we have to find a way to make things better for people. I mean, people are really stressed. The pandemic was really hard on everybody. There has to be more work-life balance. People have to find a way to manage their stress. And I think profitability in corporate America, I think it'll increase if you have happier workers and people. And again, if the more authentic you are, the more creative you are. And I think free thinking, and there's so much that could happen if we could start collaborating on a better level.
Oh boy, you hear an echo?
Right now I do.
Okay. All right, that seems to have stopped, maybe. Okay, so heartbreak actually empowered you. Should we be looking at the troubles that befall us differently than we do now? And if so, how?
I'm sorry, you echoed during the question. Could you ask me one more time?
Okay. Heartbreak actually helped empower you. Should we be looking at the troubles that befall us differently than we do now, as opportunities rather than just heartbreak? And how?
That's a really excellent question, because nobody looks.
Sorry, everybody listening out here. We're having a little technical glitches, and I'm not sure why we're getting feedback. Try again, Allison.
That's an excellent question. Nobody looks for bad things to happen in their lives. Who wants that, right? We want to be happy. We want to feel safe. We want to be successful. We want our kids to be well. But life has the unexpected in it. And we all suffer at some point in our lives. And like Viktor Frankl talks about how suffering just fills us up, whether it's big or small. It's like gas, and it just fills up a tank. And we have to acknowledge that that's an aspect of life. But how we show up for that aspect is really what's going to make the difference. So when heartache comes, you have to feel your feelings. When disappointment comes, when you lose your job, when someone you love gets sick, when something happens to your child, we have to allow ourselves to feel the experience, number one. But number two, there comes a time where we have a choice to shift things. And it's not an easy choice. Believe me, I did not think that I was going to make it through. I wrote The Gift of Maybe. I taught people about uncertainty, and that it hit me in such a way that I almost couldn't breathe. But through my relationship with the unknown and my belief that uncertainty has hope and possibility, I knew that even during my hardest times, my life had potential. So I think that it's important that we look at these aspects when life is good and when life is troubling. And there are aspects like gratitude and acceptance and expectations. If you think about it too, like I could spend the rest of my life telling the story that my husband left me and my life's not the way I thought it was going to be. And that's a very powerful story, right? Because you live 30 years with this idea of grandkids and family vacations, and then one day it just blows up. But that's what stands between me and my new life. And that's what stands between me and my potential. So again, it's like we have to look at these aspects of our thoughts and how we come to life. And I think that's what makes the difference, is whether we're going to stay in that place too long, or we're going to be able to move forward. And I don't say this lightly or easily, because this was a very difficult year for me. But I used the tools that I wrote about in the book, and I really believe that we can transcend and we can move forward and we could become a greater version of ourselves through heartache sometimes and through brokenness. I'd rather do it through pleasure, but that's not how it happened in my life. And when someone's able to do it through pleasure, please write me because I want to read your book.
It's also find that the more that you know, here goes that the more that you experience joy, the more that you experience hardship, the more you can experience joy. It sort of balances out in a way.
Yes, if you're willing to find that sacred place in life and not lose it. It's funny when, my husband first left me, there were certain points where I had felt so empty and so free that every moment that I had a pleasure, I felt it so deeply. And then as I started to kind of move forward with life, I kind of started to get stressed and worried again. I'm like, wait a second. We need to remember, not that we want to hold the pain. We need to remember the sacredness of each moment and the pleasure of each moment. It is very easy to forget. And so we have to find a way to practice it without bringing the pain back, but just remembering how precious each moment could really be. And that's a practice itself. Sometimes every morning I have to actually go through this gratitude practice and go through my maybe practice and center myself and take that time, because I don't want to forget, because if I forget, I'm going to lose the beauty of everything that's meaningful in my life. So it's about remembering and putting those things in place.
We have another question for you. How can women work with alpha males without being crushed? That's a good question. That's really hard.
It is really hard, but the only way is to be our authentic selves. Because what happens is that when we compromise and we try to fit into their world, we're hiding, we're not in truth. We're, like I said 1,000 times, we're not our most creative selves. We're not going to do our best work. So we need to come with our best selves forward. And that means that your value is not based on that job. And your value is not based on what he says to you. And your value is not based on anything other than the fact that you know that you have a right to be here. And it is a practice. And again, in the book, I talk about this a lot, that this is a hard road, but we can do it if we deal with our relationship with uncertainty. We become more responsive with our feelings and our reactions instead of being, just knee-jerk. Everything's a knee-jerk reaction. And, it's funny, in the book, I talk about that I find men more emotional than women at the end of the day, because if you include, anger and you include resentment, I've never broken up a fist fight between two women in a workplace, and I've had to do that with men many occasions. So I'm just saying, we have so much potential to speak up, to be creative, to be our best selves. And the book, I believe, really takes you through that process. And it is possible, but it's only possible if we stand firm on who we truly are. Because if we fake it, any alpha male that we deal with will just going to knock us over, because we're not grounded in ourselves, and we're just trying to pretend to be someone else. Again, not easy, but the path is possible. And I believe when women start to conquer this, things will change. But also corporate America also needs to change, because corporate America permits certain behavior. So it's the social contract that corporate America has with its employees. And it's, I think, for women to kind of rise up and say, I'm not doing this anymore. This is not okay.
How can women better support other women in the workplace?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And what's so interesting about the Motherhood Center is there's no alpha male. We're just a bunch of women together. And it's very, very collaborative. And I think what happens is we stop supporting each other when we believe there's only room for one of us. We stop supporting each other when we believe in the patriarchal, misogynistic, culture that we're participating in. We need to believe that there's room, and that collaboration and empathy and working together is the best way forward. And when we start to do that, things change. There are a lot of women, and it is not easy to be a woman in the workplace. And I don't fault anybody. Sometimes, you're hanging on for dear life. You just want to get through the day, and you don't want to get fired, and you want to support your family. But when we don't collaborate and we don't act like ourselves, we end up on the short end of the stick at the end of the day. The only way forward is to kind of find a way that we could all be authentic. And authentic, I think, is supporting, and also your male workers. It's not just female workers. I think we should be supportive to all the people that we work with. But again, a lot has to shift. And again, it's an inside job to begin with.
I'm really curious about how you moved from being a lawyer and running a law firm, and then to where you are now, which seems like this total flowering outwards. How did that process, did you ever in a million years when you went to law school think that this is what you would be doing now? And what lessons, this is a two-part question, what lessons did practicing the law teach you in terms of all the things that you're teaching all of us now?
It's funny. I remember when I was in law school, there was a New York Times article that I read, and it said, women can have it all. You can have a great career and take care of your kids. And I bought into everything.
Wow.
And it wasn't until that I was a lawyer at a large firm that I started to see the inequities. And I didn't even read about it. My book is based really on experiences. And I saw how, some of my male colleagues got better work. They got transferred to better departments. I saw that, the guy I worked for used to call me Anne, the woman he fired before I got there. It was very startling, but I didn't think that I would ever be on this path. It was really through my suffering. It was through my addiction to certainty that kept me searching for this relief. How can I feel okay about my life? But yet uncertainty followed me everywhere. And one day I realized that I'm never going to win this, and I have to make peace with the unknown. And that's how it started. And then I fell upon this idea of maybe. And then when I went into consulting, the 2008 crash happened, and all of my clients were freaking out. And no matter what I said to them, no matter how many financial statements we looked at, no matter how many marketing documents we looked like, they could not handle the fact that the market crashed and their businesses were different. And it was only this idea of maybe. And it was only through my spiritual work that I was able to infuse some hope into these people's lives. So that's when everything really started to shift. I went from the law to consulting because I liked numbers better. And then I ended up having a spiritual awakening, and then it just followed me wherever I went. And so this is not an expected path, but the law helped me a lot because it gave me a beautiful experience in the world. It forced me to be combative, I think, maybe with a lot of men. And hold my own. But I always aggravated inside. It's not till the last couple of years that I feel much more centered and I value myself more, but it forced me on the playing field, and it gave me a lot of experiences, and it made me see a lot of the inequities. So through a lot of bruising, I think that I'm here today to help women find another way. And I have found another way. I finally could say that I really believe that I have found another way to be in the business world, to be myself more, and to value myself no matter what. And that's the ultimate key.
That's so empowering. That's so empowering. Can you tell us about your spiritual awakening? What do you mean by spirit? Yeah, I want to know all the details.
Yeah. Well, no, it happened that day. It happened. I was crushed. I built my whole life. I wrote a story. When you're addicted to certainty, you write a story. When this happens, my life's going to be great. When this happens, things are going to be perfect. So I wrote this story. I was going to become a lawyer. I was going to marry this great guy. The balloons were going to come down and my life was going to be set. And I actually got to work my first day, and I heard, actually the second day I heard they were firing half the first years, and I was a first year. And all of a sudden, that story I wrote for certainty for my whole life just fell apart. It came to a total crash. And I never recovered from that moment, because I just knew that life was uncertain, and I had to make peace with that. And it's when I heard that maybe story that everything changed. I actually felt a pop in my chest, and for the first time in my life, I felt not knowing was hopeful. And that was the shift, and everything changed from there.
That's incredible. Can you talk about your podcast? Your podcast is wonderful, by the way. I listened to a few of them, and I would love to hear you. How did that come about, and how fun is it for you to do?
I love that podcast. During the pandemic especially, it was so wonderful. We were all stuck at home, and to kind of just always be able to say what I want to say and to always be helping people. It just makes me feel good. And what I love it too is it's also in the moment. It's like, when you write a book, when the book comes out, this experience I had was from June 30th, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. And it's still very relevant. But what's so great about the podcast, it's like, if I feel something that day, by the end of the week, it's in the podcast. And what's also great about it, it's 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, you can reduce your stress, you can reduce your worry, you can reduce your suffering with simple techniques. Sometimes I talk about I talk a lot about recently about the pandemic, how we see ourselves in the world, how we deal with the past, how we deal with acceptance. So they're little, I don't want to call them sound bites because they're 10 minutes, but they make a difference. And sometimes that's all you need is one little thought can change everything. And that's my hope, that little thought will make your day better, it will make you less stressed, and will give you less suffering in your life and more joy.
I wanted to ask you, oh, there goes the thing again. I wanted to, hold on for a second, let me fix it. Okay, it should be okay now. I wanted to ask you about the whole idea of empathy, especially in these politically divided times. I spent a lot of time, I don't do this anymore because I wasn't successful at it, but I did spend a lot of time on Twitter asking people who believe radically different from the way I did to just talk to me. And some people just, blew me off, but a few people said yes, they would. And I remember a conversation with one woman, and I basically just tried to find common ground with her. We all love we both love our families, we both feel this, we both feel this. And we talked for half an hour, and at the end of the half an hour, I felt, I broke through, and she broke through to me. And then she said something that I thought was so racist and sexist and horrible. I thought, why did I spend the half hour talking to her? So I guess my two questions for that is, one, what did I do wrong? And two, are there some people who you cannot break through with?
First of all, you did nothing wrong because you're looking for the world to be a better place. And sometimes that intention alone ripples out, and we can't always control the consequences of anything that happens, and we have to keep trying. I believe that you cannot let one experience, 10 experiences, 20 experiences, 30 experiences change what's in your heart. And that's what my husband leaving me taught me, that I could close down, I could trust nobody, I could be bitter, I could be angry, but that's not who I really am. And if I let that experience change me, I will never be on my life's path. I will never find my potential. I will never be joyous again. So that experience has to be, yes, that's an experience, that person's experience and your experience, but it doesn't change your heart and it doesn't change your value. And
Okay.
That's the biggest platform. Yes, there are people that will never change their minds, never. But we need to keep trying, right? We need to keep putting what we believe forward, because we have a belief and an intention and a thought about what will make the world a better place. So you keep trying. Do you learn? Yes. Maybe you don't engage with certain people on Twitter, or maybe you say to yourself, okay, well, these people have this idea. But also I've come to a place too that sometimes I don't even show up trying to change. I show up listening, and I show up speaking my own truth.
That's interesting.
Right. It's the control of the outcome that discourages us. And that's what we lose.
Right.
I always say maybe. I always say maybe next time.
But that's right. That's trying to control the outcome. Right. Like, once again, and the thing is, just listen and speak, and maybe something will happen and maybe it won't. That's really powerful. I wanted to ask you how you thought up your exercises in the books, because they're so simple and yet so impactful.
They actually came to me through my own process of actually what helped me. Like, that maybe exercise was created one day many years ago when I thought my daughter was sick. I thought that she had a stomach condition and I was freaking out, and I knew I had this idea of maybe, and I just started questioning my fears and writing these statements down. And I did it for 2 or 3 hours, and I started doing it again and again. And then I started working with my clients, and it just worked. The acceptance, the trust, anything that worked for me, that I put it into an exercise after a while. So these are all lived experiences of things that I know work for me at home. They work for me in my workplace. I wouldn't put it in if I didn't think it worked. And like, even that idea, like, just because someone says it doesn't make it true. Like, that realization for me. And then women actually have that issue more than men for some reason. We doubt ourselves more, maybe because of society or how we grew up.
Right.
That idea, that just that mantra alone, always kind of brings me back to this place where I don't have to believe what I'm hearing. I can go back to me. I could see how I feel. I could see how that sits with me. I could question the experience, and I don't have to just follow what other people say because I matter too. That mantra came to me, it inspired me, it helped me, and so I converted it into an exercise. So these all came to me through the experiences that I've had in my life, and I really believe that they work.
What's on the horizon for you now? It seems like you're doing everything. So what's the exciting thing that you're starting to think about now?
I'm going to be really interested to see where this book goes, because it's a hope. This book is a hope that as women, we could empower ourselves again, and we could kind of get our value back and how we see ourselves and show up differently. And again, it shouldn't be our responsibility, but I've been in corporate America for 30 years and it hasn't changed that much. So I have to believe that as we change, we could start businesses and we could assert ourselves differently, and we could go be more powerful in politics if we stay true to the voice that we know is within. We have to find the courage. And so I hope this book gives women more courage, because I think the potential's there. I think women are brilliant business people. I think they're beautiful humanitarians. I think they're very powerful. I think they have a lot to say. And I just hope that everybody can create their own stage and go out into the world and use that voice for betterment. I think that as women move forward, the world will become a better place. So I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm totally in maybe, but this book is a real hope. And
I love it. I love it.
Out.
Where's the best place for a woman to start when she's ready to try to find her true self and not be reliant on others for happiness? That's a good question. Women are often taught to be reliant on others for happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. We're taught to not only rely, but to take care of people so they can be happy. You know, we're taught to be nurturers. And, you know, in a way, sometimes I wonder, did we just only take the only opening left? You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, we show up and they're like, yeah, you could be the nurturer at work. You could be mommy at work. You know, you could be this. So I think it's going to be really interesting to really kind of figure out who we really are. But I do think, going back to this idea of uncertainty, I think the first place to start, you know, when the path is clear, for men, the path at work is clearer because they've had more success. They earn more money. I think that the path for women's success is more uncertain. I think that women are going to have to figure out, you know, only 2.2% of venture capital goes to women. So how are we going to raise money? How are we going to start businesses? How are we going to go out into the world differently? And I think first dealing with our relationship with uncertainty is key, because when we have a better relationship with the unknown, we're going to take more risks. And I think if women start to take more risks in the business world, we're going to find more success. And so I think that's the number one thing that we need to face, is that relationship.
Do you think that a lot of these lessons that you're teaching could be taught to children by parents?
Absolutely. You know, it's so funny. I get, over the last couple of years, I received so many emails from parents about this idea of maybe. So, and also too, acceptance is a big one, gratitude. How can we stay more present? There are beautiful exercises in the book about finding a way to be more present in life. I mean, you know, where our children are going to become adults, right? And they're going to be out in the world. And to be able to teach children about how to deal with stress, how to deal with worry, how to have more balance, how to value yourself regardless of what's happening in the outside world. Yes, these are golden nuggets that if we could learn ourselves and then teach our children, I think that's going to be a huge shift to put children out into the world who are, you know, so fearful about everything. And not that, look, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening now. But I think to put more balanced children out in the world when they become adults, I think that's a wonderful thing, and it's good to start now.
Yeah, I do too. I think there definitely has to be a different way of raising kids so that they're more whole people. I have one last question for you, which is, if you had to narrow it down, what's the one message of A Year Without Men that you'd like people to take away with them?
Again, I think women are very powerful business people. I do. I know that there's this whole thing out there like, oh, numbers. Every business, seriously, business, when you do profit and loss statements, it's just addition and subtraction. That's all it is, nothing more. And I think women have what it takes to run companies, to make more money, to love themselves more, to value themselves more, to be able to figure out a way to raise children in a balanced way that works for them. I think this is all possible. I truly do. And I think it's a beautiful moment that women could step forward and try to shift internally. And hopefully the world will be kinder too. I think that corporate America has a little bit of a shift right now, but I think we have to hold, the business world accountable to treat people differently and to care more about their employees. And but I do feel very hopeful after having this horrible experience and coming out the other side and working for a company of all women and seeing how wonderful it is. I mean, the Motherhood Center saves lives every day. They treat women who are postpartum, and everyone's nice to each other, and it's collaborative, and we're profitable. I think there are great things to come. Like I said, I feel hopeful. And again, we have to stay in maybe.
Can you show that gorgeous book cover again for us? I have a copy here somewhere. I can't find it. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? I want to remind everybody that we have links up here for you to buy Allison's book. It's great. Also, Allison's favorite bookstore is The Strand, so you can buy it there or buy it through us at bookshop.org. I want to thank all of you for being here and all of the questions. I want to thank our producer, Tricia Blanchett, who saved my life over and over again. And I especially want to thank Allison Carmen again for being so gracious to come on here. And thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you all next time. Have a good afternoon.